Chevy spoke for the first time in some time about the focus on Winnipeg's future. Let's chat about what his comments suggest on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, kicking it off with some early commentary from Kevin Cheveldayoff at the Hellebuyck tournament. Obviously, he is, he's hanging out with some of the kids over there for the team, and obviously Winnipeg is not really sending any reps currently, but overall, right, I think, the focus on Winnipeg going forward is definitely around Jets youth. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of his comments because I feel like there are one or two little pieces that are of interest, I suppose, and maybe one or two things where it's kind of like, not too sold on that, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. Before we dive into his comments, though, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, like I said, Chevy is one of those guys who often says a lot of things, but usually what you pull out of it is fairly narrow. I would say the Jets tend to play it close to the vest. I think we've seen over the years that when they talk about their plans or whatever, the Jets don't tend to be all that forthcoming. Recently, I would say that there's been a little bit of a shift. Chevy has, for my own personal feeling, been a little more transparent about things. We always used to talk about Chevy speak because he could say a lot of words, but he was always very cagey, I would say, about what he actually reveals. Recently, like I've said, I think that has maybe changed a bit, and this time he was pretty explicit about the direction of the team. There's been a really big renewed focus on the youth. And, Lambert, Chibrikov, and, players like him all came up in conversation. And the first player that really got a shout out is Perfetti. He was sort of talking about Perfetti as having had some poor luck recently. And instead of talking about him as a player that's, important, he really made him seem like he's going to be a focus of the future of the core, which to me suggests the Jets are really interested in locking Perfetti up. I think that is a good sign. I think it's something that the Jets should definitely be going for. And the fact that we really haven't seen a lot of movement on the back end in terms of an announcement of a contract makes me think that they're trying to figure terms out, whether Perfetti maybe tries to go for a bridge or he agrees to a long-term deal. Now, I will say that for Perfetti's perspective, there are advantages to both, right? If you try to do a bridge, you maybe set yourself up and bank on your own success, and you could get a nice raise in a couple of years. But if you lock in now, you get a lot of pretty good guaranteed salary, and something in $5.5 to $6 million in that range is really nothing to sniff at. That's a lot of money for a player of his caliber, and at some point, he's going to hit free agency, likely at the end of that contract. And I think that could work nicely for him as well. So whichever he opts for, he really has plenty of choices. But I think that this is in particular a really good time for him to lock in for the next few years. It also helps the Jets sort of plan around his cap hit and figure out, okay, what other pieces can we plug in and play here? So there's real incentive for, I think, both parties to figure this out. And the fact that Perfetti was very clearly identified as a core piece, for me, is a good sign. Now, when it comes to Lambert and Chibrikov, both were suggested as being impactful players sooner than later, but I think what I've kind of talked about throughout this offseason, that you have to slightly temper expectations for them, perhaps was hinted at in some of Chevy's comments. He wasn't really in depth about it, right? I don't think that there's a ton that I'm going to read into here, but he wasn't talking about either of those guys in the same way that he necessarily talked about Perfetti. He definitely talked about Lambert as having taken really big strides, but I think there's an understanding that, at the NHL level, you're going to need some time to adjust. It's not like Perfetti, who's had a couple of years here. He's going to slide into, somewhere in the Jets lineup, probably in the middle six, I would say. And, maybe they'll, introduce him and Chibrikov and slowly feed them more minutes as time goes on. They don't want to overwhelm them early. And I think that that is probably the best approach, because that guys like Nemesnikov and some other players are capable of stepping up and anchoring your top six. You don't have to throw Lambert in there immediately. Would they love to and have it work out? I'm sure the answer is yes, and I'm sure that they will try that during preseason. But I think once the actual season starts, we're going to see maybe Lambert on the third line, Chibrikov on the fourth, and I can't say that I think that's a bad idea. In fact, I think it might actually work out nicely for both of them. You give Lambert a good deal of responsibility on the third line, and Chibrikov can kind of use his relentless motor and stuff in very short bursts on the fourth, and it gives the Jets some nice scoring punch all up and down their lineup without necessarily throwing the kids into the deep end immediately. Let them figure it out. Let them see if, the next few months they start to really acclimate to the NHL level. And if they start earning more and more ice time with O'Neill, hey, you can start to promote them. But, you don't have to throw them in the deep end immediately. And I think that that would be a mistake to do anyways, because you don't want to crater their confidence. I think Lambert especially is one of those players who really thrives off of having, loads and loads of confidence. So for me, I think it was nice to hear Chevy really talk about the youth. But then one thing that kind of came up, it's Logan Stanley. And look, man, the team just really seems to like Stanley. And at this point, I don't really get upset about it. I mean, it is what it is. I think the Jets have clearly communicated that they still view him as a guy who is not necessarily critical to their future, but as somebody that is like an everyday sort of rotational player, somebody that they still think has potential. And I don't know if that's really the case. They may understand that at this point he is what he is, but they still view him as somebody who they value. Whether that's really the case and they're not just sort of puffing him up maybe for an eventual trade, I couldn't tell you. But sort of on a related note, they were talking about the Schmidt buyout and trying to open some spots for players like Heinola and maybe even Salamonson at some point. Salamonson didn't really come up, but it was very clearly about Heinola more than anything. But it could be interpreted to mean, a whole host of young players. Stanley probably included in that mix. I don't think Stanley is going to be hitting the ice necessarily, but it wouldn't shock me if he does rotate in from time to time. So, look, at this point, it is what it is. Every team is going to have a couple of defenders that you're probably not as jazzed about. And I guess if you're going to have some bad ones, so to speak, at least have them be players that you've internally developed. I still always wish that, Stanley hadn't been asked to be a shutdown guy. It's clear that when he actually attacks, there's more to his game than you would think. So for me, it's just a shame that he was miscast. I think if he'd been allowed to be the kind of player where he's a little more dynamic in transition and uses his shot a little more effectively, there could have been something there. And you'll see flashes of it sometimes when he's carrying the puck. So it's not like he's some awful player with no value. Not the case at all. I think that there is stuff to him. It's just the defensive side of his game, unfortunately, has not really improved. But maybe Chenoweth can whisper something in his ear and get him into a more workable state. We'll see this year, and you never know. Things have happened that have been crazy before. We've seen the Flyers make Ristolainen look like a serviceable NHLer. So, hey, Stanley maybe could have a career turnaround too. But for now, I think it's just nice to hear, again, the renewed focus on the youth, and I think it suggests a hopefully bright future for the Jets going forward. Now, one other thing I thought would be funny to talk about, the NHL Network put out their renewed NHL goaltending rankings in their top 10, and Hellebuyck is not number one. We'll chat about that in just a moment. But, of course, before we go too much further, did want to return to our friends at Game Time. we all know that buying tickets is always a pain in the butt, whether it's for concerts or sporting events. Look, anytime you use like a third party marketplace, you get hit with lots of surprise fees, hidden charges, and sometimes you're buying blind, right? You're not actually sure where you're sitting, even though you can see something on a seat map that gives you a rough idea. Game Time totally understands the struggle, and that's why they want to offer you killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, which is really helpful when you don't want to have an obstructed view, and their lowest price guarantee. They also come back with event cancellation protection and so much more. It's why they're an official authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They also offer zone deals and flash deals so that you can find all sorts of different unique ways to save, especially on those seats that perhaps maybe others wouldn't be interested in. But for you, you're just looking to have a good time and you want to save as much money as possible. I'm one of those people. I love going to Orioles games, and especially as we start getting to the playoffs, I'm sure the hype in Baltimore will continue to build. And, Game Time is there to help me save time and money, and that's why they're going to take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. You should too, so download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode. As we're just kind of chatting about some interesting commentary from Kevin Cheveldayoff and certainly Winnipeg's future. But, in between then, we did have a sort of amusing little thing from the NHL Network about the top 10 goalies in the league. And guess who's not number one? Connor Hellebuyck. And I'm sure you can imagine that just about every single Jets fan was pissed, furious, whatever. A lot of people were just kind of like, really? Now, NHL Network at this point, it's the NHL Network, right? Most people don't really read too much into their analysis. It's not that they're always wrong, but I think a lot of times there's just not that great. When it comes to like the main media coverage of the NHL and teams and players and stuff, I think we are kind of we're missing some of the high level analysis that you'd honestly hope for a league like this that wants to be taken really seriously compared to a lot of the other leagues. But it is what it is. Either way, though, I'm sure that this ranking is probably just one of those things that's going to piss Jets fans off even more. It does kind of suck because Winnipeg probably feels a little bit slighted, a little bit disrespected, and it is what it is. But look, guess who's in first place? It's Igor Shesterkin, and I'm just kind of like, okay, fair enough. Part of the problem I have with this ranking is that, Shesterkin, he's not a two-time Vezina winner, right? Hellebuyck is a three-time Vezina finalist, two-time winner, and truly one of the greatest goalies ever. And I think what always holds him back from being considered perhaps number one in something like this is because of his playoff success. But like the Jets playoff run this past year that everyone's sort of pointing to, look, I'll be upfront, right? Hellebuyck wasn't great against the Avs. Zero question. I don't think you can really deny that. But did you see how the Jets played in front of Hellebuyck? Yeah, you really can't pin that whole series loss on him. Hellebuyck was just completely and utterly hung out to dry on so many different occasions. And I just feel like for Winnipeg, it's sort of baffling, that they're really seemingly getting dinged for that with Hellebuyck because of their own team failure, right? Like the stylistic approach that Colorado had kind of gutted the Jets. And so like Hellebuyck, again, he was kind of pedestrian by his own standards, and he let in a lot of goals. But what was he supposed to do? Like, he couldn't seemingly carry the team on his back the same way that he was going to do during some of the regular season games, especially with just how bad the Jets were. It wasn't like it was some game where the Jets were outplayed a bit. They were completely and utterly curb stomped through almost every single game, and it was only a miracle that they even won the first game. So, for me, Shesterkin definitely has the playoff performance edge, and it's not like the Rangers play particularly well in front of him. In fact, Shesterkin actually does have to do some pretty heavy lifting behind that defense. Right, there's no real problem with that particular ranking, but it's just for me, it's kind of like, yeah, I feel like Hellebuyck maybe could have a bone to pick with that. And it's going to set up for some nice bulletin board material for this upcoming season. I think, if anything, I think Helly just really wants to have a year where his playoff run is great and strong. This year, probably not going to be that season, if I'm being honest. The team is obviously not going to be as deep this year. I suspect that, the Jets are going to have some growing pains. I think that is very likely. It's not a problem if you kind of go through some rough patches here and there, but I do sort of expect that at some point, this is going to be a bit of a tough one for the Jets, and Hellebuyck's numbers may take a bit of a dive. Now, compared to like this past season, right, I would expect him to just have some sort of natural regression anyways. He posted like career best results in so many categories this past year at a level that, even despite playing behind Winnipeg's really impressive defensive structure, was still jaw-dropping by Hellebuyck standards. He was like, I don't know how else to tell you. He was on another planet. His high danger save percentage was pretty high for himself, relatively speaking. He was basically almost unbeatable on most shot types. And, the Jets certainly gave up some real high danger stuff on rush chances and whatnot. And for the most part, he was really good. The only thing that you could probably nail him for was like PK save percentage, but it's the PK, right? The Jets PK is basically the least aggressive, most passive, most porous PK in the league. There's not really worse PK units out there other than teams that are like San Jose and a few others that are basically just kind of doing the whole rebuilding thing. So hopefully that changes this year. If he can get his save percentage on the PK to improve, thanks to hopefully improved PK support, maybe that'll tip the scales a little bit once we start getting towards the playoffs. But overall, Red, I think it's just like, it just feels like another sort of mark of disrespect for a goalie who, he's been one of the true greats over the last several years. And I say that he is a Hall of Famer. I know some people are going to be like, oh, he doesn't have a cup ring or all that stuff, but he's a two-time Vezina winner. If you've won the best trophy for a goalie in 2 different seasons, you probably deserve a Hall call. I don't know when it'll happen after his career ends, but Hellebuyck is one of the most accomplished American goalies and NHL goalies, period. So I expect it to happen at some point. I don't know when, but I think the last thing that I would really love for him is to get a ring. He is certainly good enough to have a run where he gets it. I just wonder if it's going to actually happen. We saw with Lundqvist for many years that he was behind some suboptimal Rangers teams, and he was never able to get that final championship title to add to his crown and trophy collection. But for Hellebuyck, it'd just be nice. There's not many players that I really want to see get their flowers, but if there's one guy in particular that I would absolutely kill for that moment to happen, it's got to be Helly, man. The guy has just been one of this league's best goalies and best overall performers, one of the true MVPs of any team. He's accumulated at times more goals above replacement than players like McDavid in certain stretches of seasons. He is that important to the Jets, and he at his core is like this team's identity at times. So, man, do I just hope that he gets rewarded with it. So, funny that the NHL Network still doesn't get it, but it is what it is, right? As Jets fans, we're used to being sort of ignored to a degree and maybe even disrespected, but hey, it is what it is. All that means is that he's got something to prove and a bit of a bone to pick with the league this upcoming season. And when he plays with a chip on his shoulder, good things typically do happen. So hoping for Helly to have a big year. Now, on a not really a related tangent, I guess, but one last thing I kind of want to chat about a little bit is just talking about Rutger McGroarty's future. With things, again, pretty quiet on multiple fronts, whether it's McGroarty or players that have sort of been linked as part of trades with him. I'm starting to feel like I've got one particular destination, and I keep coming back to it because I think it just lines up very neatly for a lot of different reasons. We'll chat about that in a moment. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. But before we move too much further, just two quick little things. First, thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, I highly encourage you to check out the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. While we're at it, I would also love to shout out our friends and partners at Indeed. We're all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, it's best not to search at all. Just match with the top candidates, and you can do that with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed, because Indeed matches, helps you hire, and also offers you great tools to schedule, screen, and message faster so you can connect with top candidates and actually hire them. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. And as somebody who has actually used Indeed when I was looking for work, I can personally attest to the fact that their whole little algorithm that sorts through your job requirements and your work experience to find you something that actually matches what you're interested in, plus meets your salary requirements. It was very simple, very straightforward, very easy, and it actually gave me job listings that were pretty relevant to my experience and interests. It's why, 3.5 million businesses worldwide already use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this NHL podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hey, friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on this closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We're just wrapping up with some, interesting thoughts, I guess, some final conversation on Rutger McGroarty. Obviously, no real movement at present. It's a little, I guess, frustrating to have to wait for stuff to move with this deal, but it is what it is. But look, McGroarty, I keep kind of coming back to the Blue Jackets. I'm sure you knew where this was going from the moment I said there's a particular team that I'm sort of circling around, a squad that I think, for me, makes a lot of sense. But when I think about what the Jets need and who could actually realistically provide it, Columbus is kind of that team. They've got their own disgruntled young stars and prospects, some of whom may want to leave. They've got a particular winger of Jets origin that I think almost all of us, for the most part, a few of you I know hate him and don't want him back. And, I personally disagree with that assessment. But, there's a particular Jets player, former Jet, that I think would love to have a change of scenery and return home. And I think a lot of us would love to see it happen. And I just think for Columbus, McGroarty is like a perfect kind of fit for their team. He's got some Boone Jenner in him, and I think that there's also a higher level of skill that would actually improve their offense in top six. I also think he'd probably be willing to sign there. If he's asking for a top role on a team immediately, guess what? Columbus is going to be one of those squads. I guess the only thing with that team is it's kind of like, bit of a mess. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of organizational dysfunction there, and maybe that would be enough to sort of scare him off. But if he does still want to get traded and he wants a team that he's comfortable perhaps spending the first few years of his career on a rebuilder with, Columbus seems like a great fit for him. I don't know that Laine was lying about liking Columbus. He may actually have enjoyed it. He certainly thought Winnipeg was good. And so maybe Columbus is also a pretty solid destination for a young player. But, in terms of like comfort, I'm sure McGroarty would be fine with it. He's lived in the Midwest before. It's not like, Columbus is going to be all that different. In fact, it might even be nicer with some of the metropolitan areas there. But making the trade work on both ends, Blue Jackets have lots of assets that they can include. The Jets can definitely, find a way to fit Laine's salary. There's not really that much that both sides would have to do to make this deal work. And I just think about all the other teams out there that are probably, interested in McGroarty. And I just bet you that none of them are going to be able to offer anywhere near the kind of D prospects or things of that nature that Columbus will. And if that's what the Jets are asking for, it makes sense. I keep coming back to it. I think like a Laine plus like Jiricek or something similar, doesn't have to be Jiricek, package in exchange for a McGroarty plus maybe a Pionk or an Iafallo makes a lot of sense for both parties. The Jackets cut salary this season and next. And in exchange, they get a top young player who, for their prospect pool would immediately move to at or near the top. So I think for, everyone involved, it would be a really good fit. McGroarty has proven to be like a top 30 prospect in the NHL. And I think him joining Columbus's pool would make them very formidable in the future. It's just whether or not they can actually realize their potential, still kind of a work in progress. But I just think about all the other potential destinations, and I don't see as neat of a fit. All these teams would have to give up stuff that they're probably not interested in doing, and Columbus could be one of the few teams that would satisfy all these different requirements and also give us Laine. Laine, I think, is a really big selling point for Winnipeg, especially if the Jets can find a way to get the salary down a bit, whether it's moving salary out or also having Columbus retain something. So for a lot of reasons, this for me, it just kind of makes sense. I don't know why. I'm sure people are going to be like, no, it doesn't really make sense at all. What are you talking about? But when all the puzzle pieces kind of line up, and we've heard the Jets have been talking to Columbus before about this, for me, it just makes sense. I feel like there's something there, and I kind of hope there is, because I think having Laine back, especially as part of this package, would be such a ticket seller. It'd be a huge vibe. It does kind of go a little bit against what I was talking about yesterday about the Jets maybe not trying to spend close to the cap. But listen, if Laine comes back, Perfetti likely signs something of a bridge. It, will then give you the next 2 years while you've still got Connor under contract too, to have this competitive window. And then you can kind of reassess at the end of it what the future core is going to look like. You get 2 years of one of the most exciting goal scorers the Jets have ever drafted. You get a 2-year little run with the squad, and hopefully, everything turns out well. Maybe it'll even convince Ehlers to stick around for a little bit longer past the season. But we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, at this point, McGroarty may just sit things out and not really push the issue, and just try and focus on school while the Jets have to figure out some way to get him to say yes to a trade. But it ain't easy out here, man. It ain't easy. Let's just hope that at the end of all of this, Winnipeg can come away on the winning end of yet another one of these deals where some player wants out and they still get a king's ransom for him anyways. But let me know your thoughts on this, if you think Columbus is the final destination or if you have your eye on another team. Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here next week with even more Jets coverage. So see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.